Good morning. I'm Jo Provenzano Hoppy.
And I'm Cynthia D'Elia Coddington. We are the gluten-free Epicureans.
Otherwise known as the Thelma and Louise of Italian gluten-free cooking.
But with a happy ending, Jo.
Yes. Today we're going to be preparing 3 recipes from our newly published book, Senza Glutine, Timeless Italian Recipes for the Gluten-Free Palate. Senza Glutine in Italian means without gluten. What you'll find today and what all 3 recipes have in common is that each of them uses no more than a handful of ingredients, and each of them can be prepared in very little time.
That's right, Jo. We're both home cooks, and our goal in writing this cookbook was to make these recipes accessible to other home cooks, specifically those who are now cooking for a gluten-free lifestyle. We're going to start with a naturally gluten-free dish called farinata. It's basically a chickpea crepe, and it's very easy to make with equal amounts of chickpea flour, water, olive oil, salt, and pepper. But before we do that, we're going to start with the topping, which is caramelized tomatoes. You'll see here I have 2 plum tomatoes, obviously out of season. It's winter here. And this is a really great recipe to transform what is otherwise a tasteless vegetable into something that's really tasty, caramelized, loaded with flavor. So why don't we get started? First, I'm just going to cut this in quarters. You can tell that these tomatoes are on the larger side, and if you have ones that are smaller, feel free to cut them smaller. But I'm choosing to cut these in quarters because we're going to cook these in the oven and we don't want them to burn. Great. Here we have a rimmed baking sheet. In order to do these caramelized onions, you want a heavy-duty rimmed baking sheet, and I want to just make the distinction between that and a cookie sheet. A cookie sheet doesn't have any rims. For this recipe, if you don't use something like this, it will make a mess of your oven. So here we've lined it with foil, and in our recipe we say to put 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Don't skip on this step. This is very important. Feel free to be very liberal with the olive oil because that is a total flavor bomb.
I can still remember the day when I walked into Cindy's kitchen for the first time and she was preparing caramelized tomatoes, and the smell, the delectable smell, just permeated the whole house as you walked in the door. It was very welcoming.
That's why I like to make these, Jo, because they, I think, make you seem like you're a much better cook than you are. Really, the smell on its own is very addictive. So I've now put these in quarters. We're going to place these. Jo, you want to give me a hand? We'll place these. What I've used here are a half a dozen plum tomatoes. We're putting them on this rimmed baking sheet. I also want to point out that you don't have to use plum tomatoes. Here I have a couple of tomatoes called Campari. You can find these in any grocery store. These are smaller. If you choose to use these, cut them not through the stem, but halfway horizontally through the tomato. And I've used these as well, and they work perfectly well. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to drizzle on some olive oil. And again, I have a heavy hand with olive oil. So does Jo.
Our children always want to know why when they cook one of our recipes, it's never as good as theirs, and they're convinced that it's the liberal use of olive oil on our part.
Now we're going to take 3 or 4 garlic cloves that have been sliced ahead of time. And again, this is a very forgiving recipe, so you can do as much or as little as you like. We like a lot. So we're putting on the garlic slices. And now we're going to just sprinkle on some fresh thyme.
You can use whatever herb you have on hand or whatever is in season.
That's right. And now just don't be afraid with your hands. Just combine everything. You want to make sure that the olive oil coats all of the tomatoes and the garlic. Okay. So Joe, if you don't mind, since my hands are dirty,
Yeah.
we're going to put this in the oven at 350. It's going to cook for 1.5 to 2 hours. We'll check it periodically, and that is it.
Two hours later.
Thanks, Joe. Here we have the cooked tomatoes. You can see the difference. It's been about 2 hours. You can see the caramelization around the edges of the tomato. And the slow roasting process, 1.5 to 2 hours at 350, longer if you choose to cook this for less than 350, really brings out the natural sugars in these tomatoes. It's also a technique that can be used for other vegetables. Broccoli is one, Brussels sprouts. It's an easy technique that really maximizes flavor. So we're just going to set these aside, and we'll start on our next recipe, which is farinata. I mentioned earlier that farinata is a chickpea crepe. That's the easiest way for me to describe it. It's very commonly seen in the south of France, in northern Italy, and in other locations throughout the Mediterranean. Here I have a cup of chickpea flour. If you can't find chickpea flour in your local grocery store, look for garbanzo bean flour. It's the same thing, but the labeling may be different. I'm just going to put that in a mixing bowl. And now we're going to put an equal amount of water. Just going to put that in slowly as we whisk to make sure that the ingredients are combined. Whisk that a little to combine them. You'll notice that it's a little lumpy, but that's okay. It resembles a pancake batter. I like to whisk it a little bit to take the lumps out. Here I'm adding some olive oil, 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. That's a lot of flavor here. We're going to add some salt and pepper. Salt, pepper, and we're done. It's as easy as that. We can add a fresh herb if you choose. Sometimes I add fresh thyme. You could add rosemary. You could experiment with lemon zest. It's very forgiving. It's really to your liking. We're going to let this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. With gluten-free cooking, it's really important to hydrate. The flours tend to be finer, drier, and it takes a little bit more time for them to absorb the liquid. So we're going to let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes. And while that's sitting, we're going to prepare the pan.
Regarding hydration, it's even more important in baked goods like cakes, pizza doughs, bread. If you don't let the flour sit with the water and hydrate, you'll get a very dry outcome.
That's right, Joe. And both of us have worked extensively with pizza doughs and bread doughs and even just baked desserts like biscotti and cakes. And we have found that it makes a huge difference to let the batter hydrate. And this is something that is unique to gluten-free baking. So here we have a heavy-duty pizza pan. Heavy duty is important here because it conducts the heat very efficiently. Joe, would you preheat the oven? The oven is at a high temperature. It's at 450. We're going to take 3 tablespoons of olive oil, coat the pan with the olive oil, and then you can just pick it up and swirl it around to make sure that it's evenly coated. This is important because when you put the batter on here, you don't want it to stick on the metal pan. We're using a high temperature. Just a little bit longer and we'll be ready. Okay. Once that oven is preheated to 450, we're going to place this pan in the oven for 5 minutes. The purpose of that is to preheat it so when the batter hits the pan, the bottom forms a crust. Joe, do you want to put that in the oven?
Sure.
5 minutes later.
Great. Thank you. Here's the batter. And we're just going to pour this as evenly as we can on this metal pan, scraping out every bit of the batter we can. And now we're just going to push it around so that it's covering the entire bottom. It's as simple as that. This is now ready to go back into the preheated oven at 450 for about 20 minutes until the edges are crispy and golden brown. I'll open that oven. Joe, I'm going to give her a hand opening up this oven. This is very hot and you want to be careful. Place it in the oven in the middle rack and put this on for 20 minutes at 450. And that's it. It's as easy as that.
20 minutes later.
Okay, here we have the cooked farinata ready for the toppings. Joe, do you want to talk a little about the toppings?
Absolutely. Today we're going to be using the caramelized tomatoes for the toppings, but really farinata, think of it as a blank canvas in which you could put any topping, whether it be roasted peppers, ricotta cheese, goat cheese. Basically think of anything you might put in an antipasto would be perfect in terms of farinata toppings. This is just a wonderful combination of crispiness and then the deep, rich flavor of the caramelized tomatoes. It's just a wonderful, simple combination.
You may notice that there is a residual olive oil in the pan. Do not dispose of that because that is a flavor bomb that basically can be used on crostini, bruschetta, even on a pasta dish, or simply drizzled over the top here. It contains a lot of the natural flavors.
Isn't that beautiful? There we go. Now we're going to be cooking pasta carbonara with truffle oil. For those of you who have never tasted a truffle, you are really missing out on something. Truffles are actually part of the mushroom family, but unlike mushrooms, which can grow anywhere, truffles are very, very particular about their growing environment. And as such, they're really only successfully grown in northern Italy, in southern France, and most recently in Australia. Because they are so rare, they are also very difficult to find and expensive. However, a more economical and practical way to get the same wonderful flavor is to use truffle oil. We prefer white truffle oil, and you can find truffle oil in many specialty stores and even in Whole Foods. As we start this meal, 1 hour before you're ready to begin preparing the meal, you want to take out your eggs from the refrigerator and just bring them up to room temperature. We're going to start by putting up water to boil, and I'm going to give it a liberal sprinkling of salt.
This is an important step to put salt into the boiling water. It adds flavor to the pasta.
The other important thing to note is that the boiling of the water for the pasta is actually the most time-intensive part of this recipe. This whole meal will be prepared in the time it takes you to boil and cook your pasta, which makes it a wonderful meal if you're entertaining because you won't be spending your whole time in the kitchen. It's also a great idea for a meal if you really have no time during the week and want something delicious but very simple to prepare. So the next thing that I've done is I have taken prosciutto. This is prosciutto di Parma. It comes from Parma, Italy, and I've diced it, and it really adds a lovely flavor to this meal.
This ingredient too is readily available in grocery stores. We've chosen to use the imported prosciutto di Parma, but there are many varieties in local grocery stores.
With the water now boiling, what I've done is I've whisked the eggs that are now at room temperature. I am adding a cup and a third of Pecorino Romano cheese. And we're adding 1 tablespoon of truffle oil. The truffle oil is highly concentrated, so you want to use it very sparingly because a little goes a very long way. And if you actually add too much truffle oil, it will overpower the flavor of the dish. So 1 tablespoon for a pound of pasta is just about right. So I'm going to whisk this well. Okay. We've chopped the prosciutto previously, but this is what it looks like sauteed. So basically all I've done to the prosciutto is I've sauteed it in a small frying pan with just a teaspoon of olive oil, and I've sauteed it only for 1 or 2 minutes until it's firm but not crisp. You don't want this to be bacon crumbs. So again, just 1 minute. Now the only thing that is left to do here is to cook the pasta.
For today's pasta dish, we've chosen to use bucatini, not a pasta shape commonly found in most grocery stores. It's really a thicker type of spaghetti, and it really lends itself well to pasta carbonara. But you can use spaghetti or linguine. And just for information, in the cookbook, we've included several pages called the Gluten-Free Pantry, where we list several different pasta shapes and sizes and where to get them, most of which is online. Here you can see that we have orecchiette, we have a large penne, we have malfedine. These are very unusual pasta shapes, and it has really opened up a whole world of options for the gluten-free lifestyle. So we're going to be using the bucatini. Why don't we open this package, Joe?
Yep.
While we're waiting, the water is boiling.
Now, one word on cooking the pasta. All pastas are best cooked what the Italians would call al dente, meaning firm. You really don't want mushy pasta. But this is particularly true of gluten-free pasta. The difference between perfectly done gluten-free pasta and a gummy, mushy mess is about 30 seconds to a minute. So what we recommend doing with pasta is checking the package directions for the cooking time and actually cooking the pasta for 1 minute less than what's indicated. In this case, this bucatini will take about 10 minutes to cook. Bucatini is like very thick spaghetti, and the center is hollowed out, so it's almost like long straws, and the texture is just delightful. It's actually one of my favorite pastas. One of the other things that I will say about this recipe is that while the end result is wonderfully creamy and smooth, there actually is no cream at all in the recipe. It's really the eggs and the Romano cheese, and as you will learn, a little pasta water at the end that's going to give the sauce its smooth, velvety texture.
The pasta water is very important. It contains all of the starch that the pasta has been cooking in, so it's a great healthy alternative for thickening a sauce without adding any extra fat like butter or olive oil, even though olive oil is healthy for you. So we take out about a half a cup of the pasta water and we use it sparingly. We don't want to water down the sauce, but we want to have it available to us should we need to thicken it.
Right. As I said earlier, this dish really takes no longer time than it takes to cook the pasta. That can actually also be said of all of the other pasta dishes, or most of the other pasta dishes in our cookbook, which is great, particularly for weekday meals when you're busy and just need to put something on the table that's tasty and healthy, but that is not taking up a lot of time when you've just come back from work. We have just a few more minutes before our pasta will be done. In that time period, what we want to do is we want to take our pasta serving bowl and we want to put it in the microwave for 2 minutes. So make sure you're using a microwave-safe bowl. We do this because the sauce is not a hot sauce. In fact, the pasta is actually cooking the sauce when we serve it. So if you don't heat your bowl in advance, you risk the dish cooling off too quickly.
Right before draining the pasta, we want to make sure we take about a half a cup. We want to do it carefully because you can see how hot that pasta water is. We might even do it just now, Joe.
Yep.
I like to just dip in a glass and just reserve this while it finishes cooking.
Our pasta is now ready, so we're going to strain it. We already have our cup, or half a cup of reserved pasta water. Hot, hot, be careful. We're going to take our bowl, heated bowl from the microwave. We're going to put the pasta in the bowl, and then we are going to add our carbonara mixture of the eggs, the cheese, and the truffle oil. Spread it around the top. Try to get every last bit here because this is really delicious. And then finally, we're going to add our prosciutto, which has been just sauteed briefly. And then a tiny drop of pasta water. And we're going to toss gently. Finally, we're going to end with a extra sprinkling of Epicurean Romano, our favorite ingredient. And we are ready to eat.
My favorite part. We have a farinata with caramelized tomatoes, and we have pasta carbonara. And as Joe and I like to say, buon appetito e piatto pulito.
Which in Italian means have a wonderful meal and clean your plate.